All right, welcome everybody. I'm attorney Justin Randall with Cooper Law Office. We're talking today about maintaining control of long-term care while you're still living at home and some options you can look into and certain things that you're going to want in place on top of, just paying for care, documents you want in place, planning you want in place, and things, just sort of general ideas to think about when you're looking into this as an option. A couple quick items before I start talking too much. We do have a handout that you'll receive at the end of this via email. It's our top 10 common caregiver mistakes. So I'll touch on some of these today, but not all of them, just because some of it is less to do with at-home care specifically and more to do with general long-term care planning. But it's a very helpful tool for you to have and just be aware of, because a lot of these mistakes are not intentional mistakes. Obviously, they're things that seem like they should be fine maybe, but end up causing problems for people nonetheless. So, and then you'll also receive a feedback form at the end of this as well, which will give you a place to let us know if you would like to have us reach out and set aside time to talk regarding estate planning questions or care questions, planning for care. Whether it's what we're talking about today or what we do on the estate planning side of things, we'd be more than happy to meet with you. Those initial consultations are complimentary. They are set up for about 2 hours so that we can have time to discuss everything in detail. And usually by the end of those 2 hours, we can give you a pretty good idea of what we'd recommend. But if we need to do a follow-up meeting, we certainly can. And we do ask for quite a bit of information about your family. We ask for some financial statements that have you bring those in, so we can really give you a good recommendation. It's hard to do that without having a pretty good picture of everything. So if that's something you're interested after today, please fill that out and we would reach out to you to set aside time to do that. And then before I forget, our topic next week is actually continuing this topic a little bit, but instead of care at home, we're looking at how do you maintain control of care if you're in a long-term care facility like assisted living or skilled nursing. And then as always, this is interactive, so if you have any questions, you are able to submit them and I can see them pop up on the screen in front of me and I'll answer them as they come up. It's meant to answer your question, so if something comes up, please let me know. All right, so talking about maintaining control of care while somebody is receiving care at home. Obviously, there's the financial components of this, there's the decision-making component of this, and then there's also the just sort of general, how do we even look into this? How do we plan for this and get prepared to do this? Which can both be financial, of course, and just knowing who to even reach out to, right? So in terms of the financial component of this, at-home care generally charges by the hour. It depends a lot on how many hours per day or per week that someone's coming into the home to help, right? You may not need round-the-clock care. You may not need, more than a couple hours a day, depending on your situation or your loved one's situation. So what that means, though, is that because it's based off of the hourly amounts of care and not like facilities where they charge by the day or by the month for some facilities, usually it's a daily amount, then it's hard to know how costly it's going to be to you if you don't know how many hours per week you're actually going to need someone to assist you. It can be the cheapest. It can be way cheaper than an assisted living facility or skilled nursing facility if you only need a couple hours of care. It can also be easily the most expensive, though, if you need the type of care that you would be receiving in a long-term care facility. So basically, if you need the type of care that you would receive from a skilled nursing facility and you're trying to do that at home, that means you're essentially going to have a higher expense, a much costlier situation than you would if you were actually paying for a skilled nursing facility. So it's important to know and make sure that you're aware of what your care needs are, what your loved one's care needs are before making that decision, because you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you are actually spending more money than you need to on that care. Now, that being said, of course, there's always if you are able to afford that care and you want to stay at home and you're able to cover that expense, then great. But because so many of us are not able to cover that expense in retirement out of assets alone, or it would cause us to spend through assets very quickly, you can run into a lot of issues with spending money faster than you would otherwise need to. I always use the example, and this is obviously a very extreme example, but the Bill Gates of the world, the Warren Buffetts, they could always, I'm sure, they could basically build a medical facility in their homes and have care provided at home. And I'm sure that's probably what they end up doing. But most of us out there, we don't have the kind of expense or the kind of assets to do that, or the type of income to do that. So for some of us, and for a lot of us rather, it's going to depend on how many hours per week we need. So knowing that is important, and I guess preparing yourself mentally for that as well, or having your loved one get prepared mentally for that is important, because the issue a lot of people have is that I think they think it's going to be the better option for them, or I hear a lot of, I never want to go to a facility, or that's never going to happen to me. And I get that thinking or that thought process, but it's also, you need to be realistic sometimes with the type of care that can be provided in the home and what that will cost. You don't want to be in a position of being caught off guard by that by any means, or not preparing for that expense then. But speaking of expense, when we're looking at ways to help pay for that and prepare for that, one of the first things we recommend people look into is long-term care insurance. We don't sell insurance here, by the way. It is a very helpful tool. This is a different type of insurance than like long-term disability, where it's like the Aflac of the world, where they pay if you're unable to work. This is specifically insurance that would pay for at-home care, assisted living care, or skilled nursing care. It usually provides a daily amount that it'll cover, a maximum amount that it'll cover, and a maximum period of time that it'll cover. So it's always going to be some combination of those things. Now, every now and then you'll see some sort of old policy from the 80s or earlier, where it was, oh, there's no maximum amount that it'll pay out, it'll pay forever, and it was also very affordable for this person to get. They don't really offer those policies anymore, or they definitely don't, because they were completely underestimating the type of expense that this would be for these companies, and how long people would need care, and how expensive that care would be. So if you have one of those policies, don't get rid of it. Of course, keep paying that premium if you can, hold on to it, because you're not going to find anything like it anymore. But nowadays, most of them will cover still usually about 3 to 5 years of care is what you're generally looking at. So, and that's good, right? You want that period of time to be covered. So if that's something that you can afford, if it's the right fit for you, that can be a way to help pay for at-home care if that's what you're looking to have done, where you're not spending your own assets to do so. So it provides you with more flexibility, more options than you would otherwise have to pay for care. Now, that being said, that isn't the right tool for everybody for a couple of reasons. One, it can be expensive, right? Expensive is obviously dependent on what people view as expensive. Expensive means different things to different people. It's going to depend on what they're able to afford, right? But if you have a lot of pre-existing conditions, or you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, or some sort of thing that would increase the cost of care, that can obviously increase the expense for that insurance. It can also mean that they just don't cover somebody. So I use Alzheimer's as an example. If somebody has that diagnosis and they're then trying to go out and get long-term care insurance, it's very unlikely that that is going to be an option for them, because they know that care is going to be expensive, right? But it can also be a matter of age when you're looking into this. There is no perfect age to look at long-term care insurance. Obviously, you don't want to do it too young, because if I went out and looked for long-term care insurance, I'm sure they might try to cover me. It's just I'd be paying for it a lot longer than I needed to. But you don't want to look at it too late either. And by too late, I just mean generally once you hit your later 60s, early 70s. It's not saying you couldn't look into it and that maybe it isn't the right fit for you, but it's generally where you're looking at it being much more expensive than it would have been had you looked into it in your mid to later 50s, for example. So long-term care insurance is a really good tool to at least look into. The one thing I'll say on that is don't listen to, without looking into it yourself, don't listen to somebody who just tells you it was too expensive or not to look into it, because one, even if they give you a cost to that expense, they're basing that off of their health, their age, their situation. And it's always a good idea to make that informed decision and look into it yourself if you can. So that's very important to at least look into it and talk with your advisors on that. So like your financial planner, your insurance advisor, right? Talk to those professionals, because they are the people who would be able to help you out the most with that, looking into it. Like I said, we don't even sell insurance here. We know it can be a helpful tool and advise our clients to look into it, but it's not something we have options for ourselves. We would advise you to go talk with the other professionals you work with, or if you don't work with any professionals, we would help you find that person, or give you some ideas. So otherwise, depending on the amount of care you would need at home, then if you're looking at your own assets, your own income, that's a decision that you have to make as well. If insurance isn't an option, is okay, if this is the hourly rate for care at home, which I don't have a specific amount for that, but it's generally in the neighborhood of like $30 an hour for care, and that might be outdated at this point, but that's what I've seen in the past. So you multiply however many hours per day or per week that you need, you can kind of get a ballpark of what your expense would be. And it's also important to reach out to these services as well to see what their cost is too. But if it's an option for you, great, because obviously most of us want to maintain control of our own living situation. We don't want to have to leave the home that we've lived in, right? We want to maintain that control. So looking into your options and staying at home if you can is great. But don't hold on to that if it's not a good option. Or if you're the caregiver, don't try to give care at home longer than you should just because somebody doesn't want to go to a facility. Nobody really ever wants to leave their home, right? That's not, and even the facilities know that nobody really wants to leave their home. Home is home for a reason, right? It's where we're comfortable. It's where we've built our lives. But you don't want to cause harm in terms of not getting the type of care that you would need at a facility. So as a caregiver, and actually one of the top 10 caregiver mistakes is probably trying to give care longer than you should without getting assistance because of fear of cost. Caregivers often give so much to provide that care, and then they may not take care of themselves, or it may be more than they're able to provide, or it's just beyond what they're capable of doing. If you're not a medical professional and the person needs administration of like IVs or medication or other things that you would want medical advice on, don't try to do that on your own. That could cause harm just as much as it could help. So maintaining control is important, but it also means getting the right people involved too. So the expense side of it is obviously one component of it. The other side of that, though, is looking at the decision-making aspect. So as long as you have capacity yourself, you can make decisions on that, right? That's up to you. But if you start to lose capacity or you need some assistance in decision-making because maybe you're starting to decline cognitively due to Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's can be another Parkinson's-related dementia, right? Can be part of that too. So if you're starting to decline and you would really want someone to stay, you'd want someone to keep you in your own home, it's important to have good powers of attorney in place to make sure that you pick the people who are going to make that decision, that they have the authority they need to make that decision, and that it's very broad in the types of authorities that it grants, very specifically broad though. So specifically naming a lot of different authorities so that agent can act on your behalf to enact your wishes. And this is important to have both good financial powers of attorney and healthcare powers of attorney. It's not one or the other, and they are separate documents. So making sure that those are options is important. If you have capacity still and you don't have those documents in place, or it's been a really long time since you put them in place, or if you're using a form from somewhere that you downloaded online or using the statutory form, I would highly recommend you get those reviewed or get them in place if you don't have them. Work with an attorney to do that. Don't try to do it on your own, because it often provides a false sense of security, thinking, oh, I have that financial power of attorney, or I have that healthcare power of attorney, but not really understanding what it does for you or what it, more importantly, doesn't do for you. The financial aspect, financial power of attorney is important for a number of reasons, obviously, in terms of making payments for care, having access to bill paying powers or investment powers to look into, how can we afford this? One of the more important things when you're looking at home care, maintaining control at home, would be whether or not your financial power of attorney grants the ability to set up what's called a caregiver agreement. A caregiver agreement is an agreement where if you wanted to pay a family member to provide care at home for you, because they are coming in, they're helping out, in order for that payment not to be considered a gift or a divestment from Medicaid, if you end up needing that later, you have to have a notarized caregiver agreement in place. So it can't be retroactive. It has to be in place beforehand. And if you've already been making those payments, you can stop the bleeding on that divestment, that penalty for Medicaid, but you can't retroactively go back. So what you need in that caregiver agreement is it has to state what type of care is being provided, what the payment rate is, how many hours per week, right? And it has to be notarized. Now, again, this is something that you as the individual receiving that care can set up while you still have capacity. But in the financial power of attorney, you absolutely want there to be authorities in there for your agent to be able to set that up for you if it's not something you're able to, you don't have the capacity to sign later on. So that is a very important thing to know whether or not your financial agent will be able to do for you, your financial power of attorney agent. And it can be very, very important when the time comes to do that. That provides a couple of things for you. One, it provides the person giving that care payment for what they're doing, right? You don't necessarily want them to not be reimbursed for the services they're providing. But it also means that if you do apply for Medicaid at some point and they see these payments to family members, you'll have a rebuttal to that being a divestment. You'll be able to show that caregiver agreement and show that, look, this person they were providing these services at this rate. They kept track of all the payments and all the hours they were doing things, and they have this caregiver agreement notarized. Everything's set up the way it should be. And then what that would do is prove to Medicaid that you're not just gifting to a family member, right? Which would be what they would presume if you didn't have that. So, that's a really important aspect of the financial power of attorney, but also just general bill paying. Can they talk with your advisors? Can they deal with the financial accounts? Can they even make these payments to these companies on your behalf if you don't have capacity, right? Now, the healthcare side of that is equally important, healthcare power of attorney side of that, because when it comes to deciding on healthcare decisions, not just the financial aspect of it, but the types of treatment, whether or not somebody can make decisions related to long-term care, right? You'll want to know whether or not your healthcare power of attorney authorizes your healthcare power of attorney agent to do those things for you. A lot of people are initially hesitant, especially when you look at the form power of attorney, where it says, should my agent be able to admit me to a long-term care facility? Most people say, well, I don't want them to force me into a nursing home. But it's not about them forcing you into the nursing home. It's about, if you don't give them that authority, but that's the type of care you need, how are they going to be able to help you then? You want them to have the ability to make that decision. But along those same lines, if your decision is to stay at home as long as possible, they should be able to make decisions related to at-home care and hospice decisions, right? End of life decisions if you're receiving hospice care at home, and whether or not they are the caregiver, medication treatment options, all of those sorts of things. So those two power of attorney documents are incredibly important, really, for anybody to have, but especially when you're trying to make sure that if you don't have the ability to make these decisions yourself, that someone in your family or your chosen person can make those decisions for you if you've started to lose capacity and you need assistance. So, bill paying, the decision-making aspect of it, the financial and decision-making aspect of it are both very important when we're talking about maintaining control of all those things. Another more practical thing to consider is, if you're unable to give advice on the type of care you'd want, or the direction rather on the type of care that you want later on, have you talked to your chosen agent, your healthcare agent, of what type of care you'd want? Have you talked to them about the types of amenities you'd like to have, or the types of care you wouldn't want to receive if you were at a certain point? Having that person be aware of that is very important, because reading the legal document is not necessarily going to give them all of those answers, or it may give them the ability to make decisions regarding that. But if they aren't comfortable making that decision because you never had the conversation about what type of care you'd want to receive in the home, or what your end of life wishes are, those are very important things to sit down and address with that person. In my experience, people are much more confident making that decision for somebody when they have heard it directly from them, saying that that's their wish, rather than just reading it on a document. Yes, the document states what your intent is. Living wills will say whether or not you want to be maintained on life support, but it won't be that verbal conversation between you and the person. It'll read like a legal document. And it's very important to address those things. And there's also things that those documents don't cover specifically when we're talking about, they grant general authority to make end of life decisions in keeping with your wishes. But are there any other directions you'd want to give about, like, well, give me X number of days before someone, pulls me off of life support because I want my family to be there, or, just more practical things like that. And also when it comes to at-home care, what type of care would you want to receive in the home? If you're unable to make the decision, and at what point in your healthcare, situation would you want someone to say, okay, now's the time to maybe look at an assisted living or a skilled nursing facility for me, if you're unable to give that direction at that time. So the practical side of this is just as important as the legal side of it, because these discussions are not things that you want to not have, right? You want to have these discussions so that somebody's aware of what your wishes are. The other practical side of it is kind of knowing just who to even reach out to get home, at home care. And the good news is there are a lot of really good services out there that focus on giving care in the home. And, so working with advisors or other professionals like attorneys who have connections with these groups of people who can get you connected is very important. There are services out there which are very good that will help you find the right, care organization for your facility. Companies out there that look at your care needs, look at what you're able to afford, and help you find the right fit. So you're not expected to do this on your own or know where to look. It's more important that you know who to reach out to initially to get that advice. And so, having those professionals in your life can be very helpful. And not just for yourself again, but making sure that your power of attorney agent knows who those professionals are. So what I always recommend is sit down with the financial and healthcare agent at some point, not only address your actual wishes, but talk about where you bank, who your financial advisor is, what types of policies on things you have, maybe your estate planning and elder law attorney is, those sorts of things, who your general attorneys are for, like, maybe business matters or whatever professionals you're working with in your life. Who your doctor is important too. If something happened to me right now or to my parents, for example, and I don't know that I would know without sitting down and talking to them right now who I would reach out to for their doctor. I'd have to look into that. Would I be able to find it out? Certainly, but it would make it more difficult than if they just told me or had a list of, well, here's who I go to for these types of, treatments, or for my general practice, practitioner, doctor, my primary care physician, right? Who that person is. So making sure that all of these sort of practical things are at least accessible information-wise to people, whether or not you've actually sat down and had the discussion, which I still would always recommend over just having a list somewhere. But having both is great too. So make sure that when you're talking about at-home care with your loved ones, that you explain what your intent behind that is, or maybe you talk with them about, at what point you would be okay with them looking into other options. Maybe you don't want them to cause, health care harm to themselves by not taking care of themselves because they're running themselves ragged trying to take care of you, right? Or maybe financially you'd want to make sure that they have other options available for paying for care, or that, at a certain point, maybe you look into other options because you're trying to pay for care as long as possible. The financial component of it is obviously the first thing that most people think about because they've heard how expensive care can be. And that's obviously a valid concern, but they often overlook the more legal planning aspect of it, or the practical side of it, because that's not what they're generally thinking about. You can always, sign powers of attorney as long as you have capacity, but if you don't have these in place, or they're not the ones that you would need, there's very little ways that somebody can get that authority without potentially going through a guardianship for you, which is avoidable for the most part if you have good powers of attorney in place. So I'm not seeing any questions, but I'm going to hold off going into more detail on care in a facility and choice in that matter, just because that's what we're going to be talking about next week. And I don't want to go too into detail on that, although if somebody would let me, I'd probably talk for 3 hours. So, but if you have any questions and you want to come in and talk to any of us at our office, just keep an eye out for that feedback form that you'll receive, where it lets us know that you want us to reach out to you to set aside time. Or if you reach out to us at any point trying to set up an appointment like that, you can do that as well. And then keep an eye out as well for that top 10 common caregiver mistakes, because that is a really just helpful tool to look at and just at least make yourself aware of what these common mistakes are. Again, a lot of these things on here are things that don't seem like they would be issues, or maybe you just would never know would be an issue, or never even think about being an issue, just because you don't know the exact rules around Medicaid or what is and isn't a divestment, right? And nor should you be expected to. It's not something that the general public is thinking about on a daily basis, whereas this is what we do. So of course we're thinking about it. But keep an eye out for that as well. And then I would highly encourage you to also attend next week's on maintaining control in a facility of your care, because that is probably the most common thing that ends up happening. At-home care is always the most desired thing by people, I think. But that being said, at some point, most people will end up at some level of assisted living or skilled nursing facility for some period of time. And so looking into how to maintain control of that is also important. With that, I will let you guys enjoy the rest of your day, but thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next week.